Katie, thank you so much for joining us today. Before we begin asking you questions, would you like to give us a brief background as to who you are?
Absolutely. Kate, Sunny, so excited to do this today. Really, especially excited to have both of you as my interviewers. So very similar to how we work and talk with you all about kind of your personal statements. When I think of a little bit of background of who I am, I think especially relevant to this group. It really starts like I'm also a first generation college student. That was quite a few years ago now. But I think a lot of that underlies what's important to me, where I spend a lot of my time and my focus. I grew up as the oldest of four. I'm still incredibly close to my siblings, to my parents. They're wonderful. And I know later on we'll talk a little bit about how being a first gen college student, how having parents that hadn't necessarily gone through the college experience. Like in my case, my parents are very far away from anything to do with asset management or wealth management or finance. Um, isn't bad. Like they give you a different perspective. It's just different. So my parents owned a small business in the town that my dad grew up in and I grew up in, that now my siblings are kind of raising their kids in. And that's a great experience. They know everybody in the town. They're able to stay very connected there. It's just, I think, different than what I'm living right now. So for me, it's great. And I love being able to go back there. I still go back and, my parents live a half a mile from my brother and my sister and their kids, which is wonderful. So like when I say home, I still say that, even though I've lived in New York City for the last 15 years. But I think when I think about who I am, like my family, and then that base is such an important part for me. Um, I am also someone who's always looking to learn, to learn new things, to meet new people, to see kind of what else is out there. And that curious nature, I think, has always served me well as I've kind of grown up. Has helped as I figured out college, helped as I figured out finance. But it's just something that I think is incredibly important to me. So a little bit more of like the details, and I know you guys know this. I'm at BlackRock right now. I've been at BlackRock for the last 7 years of my 15 years in the industry. Um, and today I lead our mutual fund and ETF a product pillar for the US retail market. So for US financial advisors, really lead the strategy from innovation. What products should we be launching to make sure that we're competitive for the next 3, 5, 10, 15 years, to commercialization, which are the ones that we're selling today, given this market environment and the needs of our clients, and the competitive opportunity of these products. So maybe I'll pause there. Happy to dive into anything.
Yeah, Katie, thank you so much for sharing about you and like your background, like your story. So the next question that we have, so as you mentioned, your background coming from first generation college student, did you ever feel like your background as, sorry, I'm like repeating this. Did you ever feel like your background as a first generation college student made opportunities such as educational experiences and career experiences more challenging?
Yeah, definitely. So I would kind of say yes and no to this. So in an easy way, and I saw from friends, growing up, sometimes it's easy to be able to just look to your parents and follow the same path as they are. I think in that way it was a bit more challenging. My parents were always so proud and so willing to help, but they didn't have the experience where they could say like, do XYZ. These are the colleges we think you should be thinking about. They were just like, wherever you think, we're proud. It's like I always felt supported emotionally. I always felt like they had my back. But those weren't the people that I necessarily went to for that type of advice, whether it was exploring college and what kind of where I ended up going there, or later on after that, kind of exploring my career. Now, so again, that's where kind of the yes part in terms of was it more challenging? A little bit, but I think like anything in life, I found the people who I could go to for that, right? And it's in some ways easiest if it's like, oh, that's just your parents, but we all have, I think, lots of different connections in our lives. So I would go to a couple parents of friends. One of my closest friends in high school, her dad spent his whole career at JP Morgan. So like he was wonderful. And I would go to him as I started getting interested in finance to ask questions uh, all the time. I I started my career interning for a financial advisor at UBS in Red Bank, New Jersey, and that kind of manifested. It was actually the summer after high school, and I went with my dad to meet with his financial advisor, like a very small financial advisor at the time. And I told her that I took AP Econ my senior year in high school, and I really liked it. And I was about to go off to college in the fall, and I wanted to major in finance. And she was like, "Well, how would you like to come and intern for me a couple of days a week over the summer?" And I was like, "Oh my God, this is amazing! Yes, this is great." But like, I had no idea what she did at all. So I think that like she through my career has been like an amazing mentor. So I think like while being a first gen student has certainly made education and career a bit more challenging because I didn't necessarily have my parents. Like they weren't the people that I could go to for advice. They were there for support. But I found other people there. And I think one of the things that like I always think about and is really important is you need to be able to tap different people for different things in your life, right? And know that like I know my parents are there to celebrate with me and be proud of me. And I always so that doesn't mean just because they I can't call them up right now and say like, oh, if I was thinking about moving to a different role or having a work issue, that doesn't mean I can't still like share with them. But they might not be like, oh, launching this ETF in this market is a good idea or a bad idea. But I've got other people for that. So I think like that's when it comes down to like it may have made it a bit more challenging, but in some ways it enabled me to kind of open up my circle of people that I trust that can be an advocate for me, that can give me advice. And it kind of in the early days forced me to open that wider and bring more people in. And that's where I say like maybe that's not a challenge because that's good. Could have I had like a much just a much simpler perspective if it was just my dad worked in finance. So I went to him and I was like, oh, well, maybe I'll just do exactly what you did. So anyway, that's how I kind of think about it, that it may in the short term have made it a little bit more challenging, but it's enabled me to kind of open that aperture of those people that play that role in my life.
Yes, thank you so much. It's very apparent that you come from a very supportive family and have a great community. And you just preluded this in your answer, but can you further expand and talk about the support systems, such as family, friends, or institutional resources that helped you succeed in college and your career now?
Yes, absolutely. Um, so I think the first thing that I would start here, and I know that like Joe has said this to you guys so often, and this period of this whole program is kind of on the premise of this, but I feel this is so important for college, for career, for so many different things. Like you get what you put into something. Right. So like anyone, not anyone, but most people can show up and kind of check the boxes and you're there for something versus like you're really getting everything you can out of something, and I think it's more than just showing up and being present. It's like engaging, it's asking questions, which can be scary, right? Like when someone says, oh, is there any open questions? And you're like, oh, should I raise my hand? Is this a silly question? Like that's always a bit intimidating. In college, it was and a lot of this came from my high school, which kind of had one of the premises was like a lot of interaction and asking a lot of questions. But I would always sit in the front of my my classroom in college and ask a ton of questions. And in some ways, especially when you're in college, you're like, oh, well, is this like teacher's petty? Is this dorky? I'm like, I'm a little dorky. It's fine. But like, I want to get the most I can out of something, right? So I don't care if it's like in a classroom, if someone's coming to speak with you, if you hear someone, give a presentation, like, don't be afraid to follow up after, right? Like, especially if it's something that like you engaged with. So when I think about kind of that support system of family, friends, the resources that have helped me succeed, a lot of it comes back to how I interacted with them. Like you will have people that love you, that support you, that want the best from you. Like hopefully everyone has found that circle somewhere in their lives, but like no one, like your educational experience and your career, like the person that's most important for is you. Right? So like through that whole, like you will have people that will help you, will give you guidance, but like you need to be the one that's like fully committed to that. And then not afraid to tap different people, think of different opportunities. So I think for me that always like really helped a lot. I think when you think about your family, friends, and the different resources that can really help through your career, you need to kind of take the responsibility to own that. And then it's a commitment. Like that's hard work to maintain those relationships, to keep growing them, like just like a friendship or like a relationship with your family. Like, you think of how often you are calling and texting your parents or your friends, like that type of effort is required in the same way with professional relationships. And I think sometimes people forget that because they think of like, oh, this is something different. Like, of course it's not. It's two people. And are you going to have someone that's able to really speak up on your behalf? And that's going to take work throughout your career. So when I think about kind of those support systems, you can find it in all different types of people, and it definitely takes effort you need to keep thinking about, but it's so important because those are the people that know you best. And throughout your career, it's not just about getting the first job. It's also about then how does that first job lead to the second or your third, whether it's at different companies or you're at the same company your whole career. How does that enable you to learn more and figure out what you like best, what you don't, how you continue growing and expanding there. So
Yeah, thank you, Katie. I feel like right now, like I'm like as a first generation college student, like looking for jobs and looking into like finance industry, I feel like I like struggle to like find the support like system. But hearing about your story makes me feel like much like comforted that like I will find people and I will have people, and then it will make it easier for me to like go into my job search and like going into the industry. So I think you also kind of touched on this question, but what advice would you offer to a current generation college student who wants to pursue a career in finance or banking? Are there any like steps or resources or like strategies that you found particularly helpful in your way to get to where you are today?
Yeah, definitely. So I think a couple things. And again, as you said, I kind of mentioned this, but I think this one's really important. Networking is huge. So I got my job at BlackRock, which I mentioned. So I've been here for 7 years. So I started here in the beginning of 2017. And I got my job because my summer internship at UBS, which I also mentioned earlier, right? So I started and I worked for that financial advisor the summers after after I graduated high school, after freshman year, after sophomore year. And then the summer between junior and senior year, same thing as you guys are thinking about for next year, I applied for like the program in Weehawken, New Jersey, which is where UBS's home office is. I applied for that program. And so during that summer, when I was still in college, I worked for kind of like a COO strategy team, and there was a guy on the team that I worked on this one project with throughout the summer, and then we kept in touch. And 6.5 years later, he so I guess that was 6.5 years after I started my career. So that was even a year after I also went back to college. So like over 7 years later, after, keeping in touch, not every week or anything like that. Like sometimes months would go by, but like we just would, I would keep him on my radar and keep him updated about my career and things like that. He reached out to me and he's like, someone left my team, like you should come in and interview. And I wasn't looking for a job. I had actually like just kind of gotten a promotion at my job before BlackRock, and I was very happy with what I was doing. And I was like, "Oh, Scott, I don't know, like everything's going great." And he's very persuasive. I still tease him all the time because I like vividly remember walking from my job before BlackRock at Allianz Global Investors down 52nd Street because it was on Broadway and 50th, and the old BlackRock office was like a quarter mile, like straight down into the city. And I remember walking there on my way to my interview, just thinking like, how did this guy convince me to go on an interview? Like, I'm not even looking for a job. I like am very happy. Like, how is this happening? And it just clicked. The people I met were so phenomenal. I went from having jobs that I always really liked, that I was being challenged, that I was learning like throughout in the first several years of my career, to establishing a career at BlackRock where I'm like quite convinced that I'll be here for the rest of my career. I can so it's not just a job that I like, but like a whole career that I'm building. And I didn't even realize I was missing that until I kind of found that. So I think how that happened is networking and staying in touch. So like that's I wasn't looking for a job, and you don't sometimes even most of the opportunities where when I've shifted roles at BlackRock haven't necessarily been when I'm looking for them, but they've been really cool opportunities that have found me. Now sometimes you want something different, and that's amazing too, and that's where networking is helpful because you can go and tap those people and say, I'm interested in X. Can you explain more? Can you help me connect with anybody that could help kind of move that along? But if I think about steps, resources, strategies that I've found helpful, like networking is the first one. Joe Craven, he was basically my first boss at BlackRock once I started, and he was one of those people when I was on that walk down 52nd Street. He was actually one of the first people to interview me, and that's how I got hooked up with this program. So like, again, there's just so many different connections, and like that's so important. So like network. And like, again, you should, it, like I said before, it takes work. You have to put in effort there, but it's also fun. Like just because a relationship is more of like a work relationship doesn't mean you can't like be close with someone and learn things from them. So I think that's kind of the first one. The second piece of advice that I think about is keep an open mind. So when I first started and I was working for that intern at UBS, or excuse me, when I was interning for that financial advisor at UBS, I thought I wanted to be a financial advisor because honestly, I didn't really know what else finance had. Like I didn't even know the other roles in finance. So I was like, okay, this is great. I still remember when I had to call what we would call like the home office, like the UBS central home office. I thought it was like a call center. And then as I like went through later years in college and I worked more closely, I realized these are all the teams within UBS who enable a financial advisor to provide models and products and resources and like how much there is there. I wasn't exposed to it, so I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what asset management was. Even later years after, I went to University of Pennsylvania and I was in business school. So like once I was learning more, but like at the time, investment banking was where like everybody wanted to work. So many of my colleagues were going to investment banking. And I remember really liking wealth management, but being like, oh, is that like not the right one to go to? Like, why is everyone going somewhere else? So like, I just keep an open mind. I think like one of the intentional moves I made earlier on in my career after a couple of years at UBS, I wanted to get more client experience. So I kind of made a shift in role to get more client experience. When I came to BlackRock and some of the different roles that I've had since, it's been more of like, what I focus on is who are the people I'm working with, because like who you spend your time with to me is like me. If it's not more important, it's certainly equally important to what the work that you're actually doing, right? So like always keeping an open mind about like what else is out there. I think just it allows you to like have access to as many opportunities as possible. So I think that's really important, whether it be what company you work on, what project you're working on, like all of that is just huge. And I think the more you learn, the more opportunities open up for you. Like right now, I don't have a 5-year plan. I don't know what role I'm going to do in 5 years. I've got a lot of different things that I think I'd like to do. I've got a lot of different, senior stakeholders at BlackRock that I'd love to work for again if those opportunities happen to open up. And that's how I think about it. So I think that's kind of one really important piece of advice. And then maybe a little bit more logistical. I think for many of you, you're still in college, like use those resources. Like obviously your colleges have thousands and thousands of students coming through every year that are taking those courses, using those resources, and then graduating out. You have so many resources as a college student. Like I bet your school has access to Bloomberg machines and you could learn how to use Bloomberg. They've got just like so many rich resources. And I know when you're focused on classes and you've got your friends and there's so much else going on, sometimes it's hard to like sign up for all that. And I don't mean you don't have to sign up for everything, but think about the things that you want to really use and like tap into that. Career centers are a big one. Sometimes I'm shocked at students who've never been to a career center. Actually, my freshman year of college, my freshman and my sophomore year, my scholarship or my financial aid, I had to like have a job on campus, and I worked in the career center, and it was crazy because you see like the people who would come there all the time, and that's just a small percentage of the overall population of the school. So I think like those resources, whether it's classes or programs or professors, like use office hours. I remember one of my college professors that I still email with probably every like 3 or 4 months. He's amazing. He would always say like, there was you can have the student who just knows all the answers, and that's great. You can have the student who's never going to know all the answers, but tries really hard. And that really matters, whether it's in a college course, whether it's in your job, like showing up, putting in the work, asking the questions, like it's incredibly important. So I'll pause there, but hopefully a couple pieces of advice and things that have certainly worked for me over the years.
Thank you, Katie. And again, Sunny and I are college students, so that piece of advice will stay with us as we approach our careers, but also just as we approach life. I think you can apply that to many scenarios. And I'm also very happy that you shared your unique story with BlackRock and how you're very happy and you're glad to be there. And you've shared some great wisdom with us today, and we sincerely appreciate that. So we just wanted to wrap up the survey by asking you to kind of look back on your life and reflect, and then provide for us a piece of advice you would give your younger self if you had the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. I think probably the biggest piece of advice that I don't practice all the time here, but I try to remember, now 15 years into my career, is every decision isn't like a make it or break it. Right. Like, so as I see, and I've got interns that come into my team every year. I've got first year analysts. Our first year analyst is starting in just a couple weeks. And at the time, it seems like, oh my God, if you don't get this job, if you don't get into this college, if like this is like, it's going to be like, oh my God, this is going to be the end of the world. And like, it so isn't. As I said before, like the broader your breadth of experiences, like the more open doors you have, just like the more people you're going to meet, the more things that could come up on your radar. Like there's no one path. I think there's lots of different paths. And if you make a decision that you're like, wow, I'm doing something that I really don't like. And I was for a certain period early on in my career. When I was still at UBS, I started in a rotational program. So every 3 months you would move to a different team, and then I placed out, and I really loved my team. And then that role shifted a little bit. So for a little while I was doing something I didn't love. At the time it just feels like, oh my God, this is like, what am I going to do? This is just, everything seemed so extreme. So I think the biggest piece of advice is like, don't agonize over, I mean, be thoughtful, get advice, talk to the people who are in your life to give you that advice to figure out whether it's going to be what job you're going to do, what project you're going to work on. But like, you will pass that. So I think that's the biggest thing, is just like decisions that I made that I thought were going to be like make or break my entire life. Like, they don't make or break your entire life. You always have opportunities to shift them. Like, it happens quicker than you think. So I think that would be the biggest thing. Like, look at everything as a learning opportunity, as opposed to like the make it or break it decision that's going to like make you happy or make you miserable forever.
Thank you, Katie. I think I really needed to hear that. I mean, I think everyone just needs to hear that sometimes, because we're just so like goal driven that like when we just want to go after that one thing. But I know like there's more opportunities, there's so many things out there that we can learn. So I think that, yeah, so thank you. And I think that was our last question.
Good. No, that is a big one, right? Like, I still remember getting my rejection letter from Georgetown when I was a senior in high school, and it was like, I remember like sobbing and being like, "Oh my God, I'm gonna be a failure. I might as well just quit school now and go." And like, it's just everything seems so extreme. And I laugh now because I actually I went to University of Richmond and then transferred to University of Pennsylvania, and both like, amazing schools, and it was great. But like, now 15 years into my career, like, I don't talk about what college I went to. Like, it's like, not that like that's great, like that experience, but like that doesn't come up in normal course of conversation. That really doesn't help me or hurt me one way or the other. Like, so it's just funny, things that you think are going to be like so extreme, they're not. So I think that's always something to like keep in mind. And that's what I try to keep in mind too, of like, if I'm working on something for work that like either is super stressful or is like a really big, I try to remember like, first of all, you're going to get through this, and also like, this isn't going to like define you.
I think that's a great way to leave off. Nothing in work can define who you are as a person. And I'm so glad that you're sharing that with us, as you have been in your career for quite some time now and you've had successes. And you've also shared a similar upbringing as us as First Gen. So great story, Katie. Thank you so much for being with us. And also, thank you so much for answering these questions so candidly.
Of course, anytime. It's been such a pleasure getting to know both of you this summer, and I'm so happy that I got to do this with you both.
I'm